Hey guys, and welcome back to Sculptable. In today's video is going to be a little bit different because I'll be talking through my sculpting process. Today we're sculpting the Sith Lord known as Darth Vader. I think a few of you know who he is if you've watched Star Wars, and if you haven't, I'm just going to say why. So yeah, well, let's just get into this. Well, first things first, I start off with a basic base mesh sculpt, and I'm refining my vertices and making everything have the basic shape of the helmet, which is kind of the most difficult part of the sculpt, to be honest, and just using a mixture of primitives and some subdivided spheres, using the draw, hook, push, crease brushes together to kind of make a nice effect for the sculpt, as it's very angular because, you know, Darth Vader's helmet's it's menacing and scary, so we're going to try and get that with the sculpt. And moving into more refinement here with the helmet, smoothing out the edges, obviously not subdividing this sphere any more than I already have in Blender's subdivided state when you first load it up, but it does the job until I go into Dintopo to refine things, but that's a later stage for this. I'm really just focusing on getting the good flow of my shape language here, making sure everything looks good and is easier to sculpt off of when you add detail, because if you go straight to detail it wouldn't really look too great. Next, I move on to the outside helmet, the dome I like to call it, where I go in and pull and extrude just the basic shape of the helmet so you can kind of get it to work as the shape of Darth Vader's helmet. And I'm kind of going for more of a stylized, realistic look for Darth Vader in Blender just because it's easier to sculpt at this stage. But as you can see, it kind of works for the simple stage where I then refine the cheekbones, I guess you could say, of the mask. Then going into the eyes, making sure that I kind of shear the edges to make them look more stylized, and then going in with the crease brush to refine the edges later on, making sure that they are popping as sharp angular lines as the helmet is normally in the films. So yeah, I'm going in there, refining things, removing meshes, adding meshes, making everything pop and look visually appealing, then going into the helmet and removing some geometry there to make it stand out and look visually appealing and quite angular. And then move on to the panels of the helmet, going around and making sure creases are added, changing the overall shape and flow of the forms on screen so that I can make sure that it looks correct. And then going to add a few of the respirator marks, I think they're called, something like that, going in to add some of the detail there, adding in the neck piece, and then moving on to the body. So for the body I add some basic primitives and some spheres and what have you to make a basic base mesh for the character. Well, then I go in to add some more detail and pose the figure. I was originally going to use a rig, but to save time I decided to just pose it freehand. As you can see, I've made all the fingers together and I start creating a Star Wars Darth Vader-esque pose. The idea for the pose for Darth Vader was so that I'd have the camera looking at an angle upward and he'd be kind of force choking and using his lightsaber with his other hand, which I thought was a kind of cool idea. So that's what I aimed to do, and I went in to just make sure the pose was clear, remove my rig that I tried to use before, which is annoying because it wasn't working. But anyway, I move into the detail stage of the character. After making the pose a bit more refined, I just combine all my meshes together using Ctrl-J and then remeshing using the voxel remesher in Blender, which you can find in the sculpt mode panel when you're changing your panels to go into sculpt modes instead of modeling. So yeah, once you do that, it removes the polygons of the individual meshes and combines it into one unified mesh, which is great for sculpting on top of. So I go in and I add some basic detail of where the muscles should be and some basic overlap for the meshes so I can smooth it out and make it look a bit better. And obviously there's not enough muscle on Darth Vader because he's a charred human being and he's kind of destroyed, so basically just working on the cloth and making it look like Darth Vader from the waist up basically. And then you can see here I'm using the Bezier curve function in Blender to add some basic belt buckles and loops, and then posing Darth Vader a little bit more there to make it so that I can get a basic look for the character. Then going to add another sphere here at lightning speed on this video so that I can make it so that he has a cape, and I'm just basically making a quick stylized version of Darth Vader, so realism isn't really the option here. Just making sure that I can add some detail with the clay strips brush there for the chest plate, and adding some extruded meshes, which I use the mask brush in sculpt mode for, so it makes it much easier to create armor pieces and extruding geometry instead of having to create a new mesh entirely, which is really cool because it draws around the mesh that you have and creates a new piece of geometry, which is fun to use. I then go into here adding some of the airlay cloth block out, which looks okay when you start out, but really going into details where the magic happens with this character, because obviously you're kind of creating that padded effect with his outfit. And then go here and adding his waistcoat cape thing. It's kind of like a trench coat, but around his waist. Someone in the comments could correct me as to what it is, but yeah, going in there, making some details to the cape. Quick editor's note, I forgot to add the chain around his neck, so forgive me for that, but moving rapidly on, I'm then adding some detail to his gloves, his arms, making some nice fabric detail for the gloves, which are kind of a synthetic fabric material, so I'm kind of making sure I add in the lines for the stitching and the panels and the pads and things for Darth Vader as much as I could with my stylized effect I was going for this character, making it kind of look unified across the board and trying to make it look appealing for a stylized mesh, which is very important to have good visual appeal when you're trying to create a character that people will actually want to look at when you're doing character design. But for this stage, I'm just making sure that I have everything ready to go, and here you can see I've got all my normals correct and placed out before I go into adding more detail, because I've added some buttons, some loop cuts, I've added some more detail and made everything mesh together. And then I'm going in to add the details to the cloth using the then topo function in Blender to make sure I can up the resolution of my models once I've got the basic layout in, so I can then smooth out any shaped planes and harsh changes in geometry that aren't looking quite so good, and it also upscales the resolution of everything, which is nice. And then going in to add the lightsaber, which is just a basic extruded cylinder with some more cylinders added on top, and then using some cuts to the face geometry, and then using a solidify modifier to really just make that effect where it's kind of got the cutout effect for the top of the lightsaber. So that was easy to do. And basically just some more cylinders wrapped around the base of the lightsaber, a few spheres, a few cubes, and basically just putting that all together and then moving it over to the hand, and then adding a basic tube for the lightsaber because this is just a stylized sculpt. There's not much rendering to be done. But yeah, just Command C, Command V, copy everything across here to make the lightsaber hilt, which was a bit of a time consuming process just because I wanted everything to kind of look okay. And I only worked on one side to save time for this sculpt because it took quite a while to do. But yeah, for the side that's visible, it looks pretty good. There's a little stylized version of Darth Vader's lightsaber. Just making sure to add the finer little details if I can, apart from little loops and buckles, because this is a stylized character and you don't want to have complete realism, you know, when you're making a character up, but that's fine. So I went in and added the lightsaber, positioning a wee bit, making sure that it looked okay in the fingers, and a bit of a resize because, you know, it's a stylized character. You don't want it to look completely realistic. And then with that in place, a bit of tweaking is concerned. Do a quick save of the character, then turn off the topo function of Blender, then go in to add some more meshes for the lightsaber blade itself, which is just an extruded sphere, just so you can understand what's happening. And obviously if I'd rendered this, it's only from the waist up, but if I'd rendered it properly I would have added a emissive glow to Blender using the bloom function that you can enable in the EV viewport rendering settings. But Blender in 2.91 is having a bit of an issue with rendering vertex colors in the shaded view, which is a bit weird. So I basically just went through and tried to do a bit of shading to make it look kind of nice, but unfortunately until they fix that glitch that I'm having, I won't be able to actually do proper renders. So I decided to just go with the plain matte caps and make it look nice. But as you can see here, this is what I was kind of going for that kind of fingerprint smudge effect on Vader's helmet. And obviously if you wanted to create a smudging effect, you go into some render alphas and add them in as brush alphas and sculpt them on top with your texturing. But for this, it's just a stylized character, so it's not that important. So I was just fiddling around with the texturing and trying to make the cape look nice and so on and so forth. But then I ran into the difficulty of trying to actually import the vertex colors, which were not really working. But yeah, for vertex colors, for those of you who don't know, it is basically like polypaint in ZBrush, but a little bit more finicky to work with, I think. Basically, you're just painting on top of the vertices that you have in a solid color, and you can change the opacity and visual settings to make it look a bit nicer. And yeah, it was not working in Blender 2.9, as you can see on the screen here, so I don't know what that was, but if someone knows how to fix that, let me know in the comments below. But yeah, this is the final sculpt for Vader here. Yeah, he looks pretty good. It took about 3 hours to sculpt in total, but this is a time-lapse video, so you don't see the whole process because that would take way too long. But yeah, I hope you enjoyed the video and hope my insight was helpful to any of you fellow digital sculptors out there. Subscribe and comment down below what you thought of the sculpt in general. But till next time, guys, I'll see you later. Bye.